Hi everyone, my name is Neha, and I'm an engineer at Pivotal Labs. So my topic today is phrased in a pretty enterprise-like manner. It's not you, it's us, winning over people for yourself and the team. I'm talking about this because I think the concept of teamwork and influencing people is something that's so fundamental that I think this is what makes or breaks a company, and it definitely makes or breaks someone's decision to be at the company. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about. And my goals for us today are to give you guys a tool chest of techniques to enable all personalities of your team, your clients, and your customers to prevent and mitigate issues as they come up with a facilitator's mindset. So this is like a really hefty goal. So I'm going to break it down for y'all. The first part is all personalities, right? So I imagine that you guys came into this room because you already agree that at some point we have to integrate all personalities. So I'm not going to say too much about it. I will say that while having a diverse set of personalities is fun, it can also be a pain in the ass sometimes, right? And I think that while it is a pain in the ass, I think as amazing as you as individuals are, 100 of you are not going to make a good company, right? 100 Steve Jobs would make a really bad Apple. 100 Arianna Huffingtons are going to make a terrible Huffington Post, right? So we need that diversity, and that's why it's baked into this goal. All personalities, necessary evil. Let's just get over it and talk about it, right? The second piece is this facilitator's mindset. So what is a facilitator? It's someone who is enabling decisions by knowing where the team is and where they need to go. So as a facilitator, you'll help the team focus on the goals, build relationships between the team, and the more you listen, the more the team will understand. You'll be able to understand what's going on with the team and interrupt a little bit less, listening more. That's kind of like the whole facilitator's mindset. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in like very tangible activities that you can do. So the third part is to prevent and mitigate issues as they come up. So that's like a two-part piece, right? We want to have some things in place to be able to prevent issues coming up in the first place, and then we need to know what can we do once they're here and how can we resolve them in like a really good manner. So those are the two pieces that I want to cover. And the last piece, which is my favorite part, is where I actually give you some sort of nuggets, right? So it's this tool chest of techniques. So that's the meat of my talk, and I'll talk a little bit about the facilitator's mindset as well. And before I dive into this topic, I kind of wanted to introduce myself and give you my background so you understand where I'm coming from. So I do not have a computer science degree. I came from the chemical engineering world. And I was an energy consultant once upon a time, but I won't say how long ago. And what I was doing there is I was working with utilities to understand their demand and their supply and how to balance that with respect to decisions. So should you take power plants on? Should you be brownfielding or greenfielding new ones? What's your forward load going to look like? All of this like very technical stuff, right? Kind of. So that was part of it. And the other part was this like very people-oriented piece. So I was doing business transformation, enablement, like all of these like very buzzword things, and it was really frustrating because I came from a very technical degree and all I wanted to do was focus on that, and I had this people piece that I didn't want to deal with. So you know what I did? I rage quit, and I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get away from dealing with people and I'm going to go into programming. So that's the next 3 tiles in my past, right? So I was like, I know how to get away from people, so I taught myself how to program. And then I went to Recur Center, which is formerly called Hacker School. And that's like a it's like a writer's retreat for software engineers, or actually any programmer. And there, I was like, I'm finally on the right path, and I can just ship code. Went to 2 companies, and every single time I went to a new company, I realized that something was following me around, and it was this people thing, right? So it was like karma, where I couldn't escape my problems. And I just wanted to ship code. So I ended up at Pivotal Labs. So now my job is to deal with people 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So now that you know I'm completely crazy, and like when I say 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week, I don't mean that like I'm just in meetings casually and then I write code. No, I pair program 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So you know I'm completely fucking crazy at this point, right? And on top of that, it's not just with these I do have wonderful coworkers who are naturally empathetic and who love pair programming. But I also have clients who sometimes sign up their employees to show up at the door, and they're like the unwilling victims that I have to pair program with, right? So that's another wonderful component. And I joined Pivotal Labs because I had heard that they followed these best practices and somehow managed to stay afloat. And to this day, I kind of get it, and that's why I'm writing this talk, is to show you my learnings about it. And also I kind of don't. It feels like magic in a way. So anyway, I was curious, and I am happy to say that I've survived. Today is my 1-year anniversary, actually, so I get to celebrate that with you all. And I don't hate people anymore, so that's wonderful. That was a new thing that came up. And I have a much better understanding of how to deal with different personalities, and I've spent time at the company with people who know how to do that too, so I get to learn from them also. All right, so this is basically the thesis, right? People are both the problem and the solution. And it's pretty clear, given my past, having gone through so many different career transitions and different companies, that people, communication, and teamwork, all of this soft stuff that you don't want to deal with, is actually really crucial to getting your product out the door and keeping your company afloat. At Pivotal Labs, I've learned about this especially to deal with difficult people or people who are unwilling victims, because we have very unique circumstances. And that is that we have some say in who we work with, but not complete say. I have no idea what industry, project size, personalities. I have no idea who's coming in the door for my next project. And honestly, if you're going to work with Pivotal Labs, right, you're probably looking for something more than just code that works. It's possible that you have engineers who are cowboying the code base. It's possible that you have a set of people who are just not used to collaborating and don't know how to do that well. So that's what we're good at, right? We're teaching your engineers, PMs, designers, this agile way of working that is collaborative. And there's a word for it. It's called enablement. So we're enabling you to be able to do it yourself. And we're not actually trying to get you to hire us for life. We're trying to replace ourselves. So we want to enable you with these tools and then let you go off and be productive on your own. And if you do want to come back with a new project, something interesting, a different set of problems, that's what makes us excited. So with enablement comes with working with a new team, new personalities, new opinions, and preconceived notions. And that brings me to the actionable part of my talk. I want to talk about the things that we do and what makes us successful, in my opinion, through my views, after my 1 year of experience. So to do that, I'm going to use MIT's motto. This is my alma mater. And we have a little motto embedded into our logo, and that is mens et manus. So that's Latin for mind and hands. And the thought is that these two pieces need to be working together, right? So unfortunately, I'm making you think and act as well. So I'll be doing these two specific components, and I'll be separating them out during my talk so you can see something that's more of a mindset piece or more of an acting piece. And with that, coming from my scientific background, so I didn't really mention, but I was in biological engineering at some point as well. So there's some science going on in my background. I think that experiments, this is a huge theme that's been going on at our conference, right? This feedback loop, this concept of iterations, running experiments. This is a huge fundamental core. So I've built that into my talk. And so this happens with all our projects, right? We have to align on what we want to do. We have to plan it out. Then we execute, my favorite part as an engineer, and we have to have feedback around it. The point behind consciously applying this structure to what works for you is that you don't have to worry about it once it's in place, and it'll be a predictable way of working. And that way you can focus on execution, and if needed, you can focus on the bigger issues at hand. So I'm going to be taking us with this framework through 3 levels of granularity. And that is the project level, the daily level, and, you all can read, right? Project level, weekly level, and daily level. So at each level, I'll be talking about embedding this feedback loop or this iteration loop into your work and show you that you do this unconsciously too. This happens on a daily basis. And if you can do this, you can foster good teamwork in the first place so that you can mitigate some of these issues. All right, so project level. Obviously, I'm going to go through some of the mindset. The first piece is that making team friends is hard, right? What I call team friends is like when you're on a new project and you have to get to know each other. It's like really awkward. And let's all agree that making team friends is hard, not because the team is hard, it's because making friends is hard. Like think back to when you've met some of your friends who you kind of did not like at first. Like it's just like a hard, really awkward process, right? I am still working on this, but I will like kind of unconsciously decide if I'm going to be friends with you in the first 30 seconds. And that's pretty dumb. Like I don't really think I can get all of the information about you in 30 seconds. And so I like to try to separate when I meet someone into 2 different areas, right? There's red flags and there's yellow flags. So red flags are kind of like destructive, threatening, or completely non-compliant behaviors, or like where our values have no common ground. And there are cases like that, and we've had them at labs. So we've had someone who like, when he's upset, tends to threaten people. So he was banned from our office, right? That's red flag. That's right out. And we, like it happens. But the rest of this stuff, like there's other situations that come up that we think are red flags, but are actually yellow flags, right? So I've worked with someone who straight up told me on a JavaScript project that they hate JavaScript. And I'm like, all right, I'd never want to work with you. Why would I do that? So that's a yellow flag, right? And the other one is like, when someone tries to joke around and they're like, but tests are really optional, right? And like we come from like a very rigid, like extreme programming, must do test-driven development. And so like for this is like a violation of my morals. And I'm like, I can't handle you right now. So I'm just going to ignore you, right? That's a yellow flag. So these are real life people that I've dealt with, and we get along now, right? So it's the concept that yellow flags are just yellow flags, and you got to get to know someone, and usually there's more behind it. I have another story for you, and that is that I was working with a client who had a like unique set of personalities, and they all worked very, very, very fast. But like so fast that the entire house was on fire all the time. Right? So they would make a decision, and then they would undo the decision, and they would make it again. And it felt like my one job working with them is just to slow them down, right? And on top of that, this was in Go, and I didn't know Go. So you can kind of get away with this a little bit at labs, because when you're pair programming, if you're able to learn very quickly, you can pick up a language, and you can be productive in it. So we had yellow flags raised for each other. I was like, I don't really want to work with them. They work too fast, and they act like everything is on fire, and they need to chill out. And they're like, she doesn't know Go. Why are we working with each other? But over time, we found ways to give value to each other, and there was like a happy medium in between where we were contributing, and there were pros and cons, but they fit really well together. And interestingly, this was a rough start, but not expressed in ways that I thought it would be. I thought like we'd both be stamping our feet and saying, I don't want to work with each other. But you'll notice these signs in different ways, right? So sometimes people are not as engaged initially, or they're trying to wiggle out of best practices. That's how you'll see this expressed. And over time, they were much more engaged. They're much more down with the system. And we had a successful product. So it's about like ignoring these yellow flags and working together, mindset. The third piece is to remember that we're on the same team, right? It's really hard to do this, and I find that during arguments and during a time where I look at you and I'm like, I want you off my team, I have to remember that we're on the same team, and there's probably a reason that we're not getting along. And often it's just because there's like a difference in execution strategy, not necessarily a difference in desire. So that's the third piece. And now I'm going to talk about a SWOT analysis. Who here knows what a SWOT analysis is? Yeah, most of us, right? It's like this really business framework that, like, I hate business frameworks, but I really like SWOT analyses. So the reason I like this is because when you're starting a project, you really need to understand what you're bringing to the table. And do you know what you're bringing to the table? Perhaps you do, and perhaps you don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you to work. So just in time, if you have a phone, a laptop, or something to write down with, I'm actually going to give you 5 minutes to write down for your project what are your strengths, your weaknesses, the opportunities that you bring to the table, and the threats. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for that. And you can play Pokemon Go during this time, but I'm putting you to, there's like an auxiliary step where I will kind of be testing you. So if you want to do it, please engage. Otherwise, feel free to use these 5 minutes to enjoy yourself. Go. And if you have any questions on the SWOT analysis, I can answer that too. Oh, examples? Yeah. Okay, so on my Go project that I was talking about, some of the strengths that I brought to the table was that I've dealt with the same problem in a different context. So one, I know a lot about agile processes. Two, I'm very good at taking a step back and not letting everything go on fire. Weaknesses, I don't know Go. And the technique that we were using specifically was very new to me. So opportunities, I could bring a different component to the table. And I've seen a project end to end, and I've worked with some of these personalities before. Threats were that it might not go well if we don't get along, or if I'm not able to pick up the language well. And the nice thing about these threats is you can come up with mitigating strategies, right? So what can I do in order to make this successful given the threats that I'm aware of? And so this directly translates into action items. I told you there's going to be a test component, right? So I'm not actually going to call on you, but I will have you share them with each other. And the point behind this is to see whether you have some similarities between your SWOT analysis and someone else, and seeing if there is that overlap between strengths and weaknesses. So I will have you talk to each other. So pair up, look to your left, to your right. There's a lot of you who are like one person per row, so also you can look behind you or in front of you. And I'll give you 5 minutes. So explain what your project is in very vague sense, and then talk about your SWOT analyses and compare them. Go. I'm going to have y'all wrap up. How was that? Was that helpful? Yeah. So the reason that I went through this exercise was so that you have a pretty good understanding of what you bring to the table. And that kind of leads to the next piece, which is, oh God, come on. All right. What do you want and why do you care? So there's no more interactive portions, mostly in the interest of time, and also because I already put you guys to work and I tweeted about it, so I got my piece out of it. So what do you want and why do you care? I think it's really important not only to understand how your personalities mesh on the team, but also specifically to know on this project what you want. Because if you can't answer that, you don't actually know what's going to bring you joy and what's going to make you frustrated. On the flip side, do you know what your other people on your team knows? Do you know what they want, and do you know what they care? This is basically word for word empathy. Can you put yourselves in their shoes? And I'm putting this up as a slide specifically because if you don't know, then this is a potential source of conflict, right? And so we've literally had on one of our teams, just because we were all coming from different areas, and explicit, during a retro, we decided to write out what all of our goals are, and what we are specifically caring about in this project, what's our stake in it. And so I have a story that goes along with that. And so I was working with a client that was really hell-bent on productivity, to the point that they were coming up to me, and we have these concepts of anchors, so they're kind of like the point person for the team, but not necessarily the technical lead. So this person was coming to me like 3 or 4 times a day being like, how's it going? What's the progress? Do you have anything you can show me? And like, we have 8-hour days, right? So that's every 2 hours I have to show them what I'm doing. Like, I don't want to be bothered in the first place. I'm already pairing, like, and we're documenting everything on Pivotal, like on Tracker. So you can just go log on to there and you can figure out what's going on. You don't need to bother me all the time. So normally I would just be like, if you ask me one more time, I will freaking explode on you. But I did not do that. And the reason is because I had to understand where they're coming from. So this is someone who put their reputation on the line to work on this project and had a lot at stake. And once I was able to put myself in from that perspective, I was able to understand they're not annoying me for annoying's sake, which is how I want to perceive it, but they're actually trying to check in, figure out if there are any roadblockers, figure out like what they can go back and tell the stakeholders to prove to them that this is a productive app that we're doing and it's like going really well. So now I understand why they care and what they actually want, and now I can address those pieces individually instead of just getting upset that they're difficult to work with. The next tool I wanted to talk about are inceptions. So inceptions are a meeting that we at Pivotal Labs use at the beginning of a project. And the whole goal is to align on goals and on the scope, but more than just that, we actually want to be productive by the end. So these are kind of the activities that we do, overview and scope, deadlines and milestones, talking about your goals and anti-goals, talking about risks and mitigation strategies, and then kind of like getting into work, right? So let's define some of the workflow. Let's start writing stories, right? Like different tasks that we need to work on. Let's prioritize them, and let's talk about it at the end, how it went. So remember how I talked about this? This is like literally the Pidgey and the Ratata of like my presentation. So it's going to show up all the time. And so it's this whole concept, right? In our inception, we're going through the entire feedback, like that iteration loop all over again. And I'll show you specifically how they map up, right? So we were talking about overview and scope, deadlines and milestones, and like the goals. And starting to talk about risks, that's all alignment, right? We want to be on the same page. And now we're getting into planning. How are we going to mitigate those risks? And let's talk about our team, our roles, who our stakeholders are, and how we're going to plan that out, and what our workflow looks like, right? That's planning meets execution. And then story writing and prioritizing is definitely in the execution phase. And at the end, we have that feedback piece, right? How did that session go? And how are we going to go on from here and talk about the highest risk things and mitigate those too? So I'm a big fan of inceptions. It makes me feel like at the end of the day, not only have we become aligned on everything, but we've actually accomplished something during the day. Because I feel like most people want to just do alignment and planning and then just stop there, right? We're on the same page, let's go, we'll do some work. But it takes a little bit of time for us to work together and start to understand our ways of working before we want to separate off and just do our different interpretations of what we actually need to execute on. So it's really nice to have that like together time. I'll let y'all take a photo. And for me personally, my favorite part of this is this risks and mitigating strategies piece. So my friend used to say that engineers are like the people who come into the room and want to know what to happen if the zombie apocalypse happened. And like literally we're looking for every possible edge case and how to mitigate every single one. So this risks and mitigating strategies piece is a place for us to be heard, right? So it's like, it's our moment to shine. And I can finally talk about all of the concerns that I've had. And we can talk about what's practical, what's likely to happen, and what are our unknowns on it. And then, instead of just complaining about everything and being like, it's not gonna work because we don't know A, B, and C, we can talk about mitigating strategies. Maybe there's a piece that's so unknown that we need to work on that piece first. Like, it makes sense to get all of your infrastructure together, but if that hinges on one piece being able to be done, maybe we should reprioritize that. So it really feeds into this entire conversation. And it helps when you feel very frustrated that you still have no idea going into the project whether it's going to work or not. Having this conversation enables you to get that out and not have it build up, where like in 2 weeks they're like, how's it going? And we're like, we don't even have a product. I don't know if it's going to work. Why are we doing this? That's happened before at previous companies, and this is a nice way to mitigate that. The last piece I wanted to talk about is another mindset one, right? So I talked about at the beginning how part of my goal is to have this being facilitated through a facilitator's mindset. And I've actually had the benefit of taking training in that when I was in consulting before I was an engineer. And these are the things that I like the most from it. So it's starting meetings with a very specific purpose and scope, and also allowing, if people bring up things that are out of scope, instead of like slapping them on the hand and being like, we're not talking about that, they can just have a place for that to go. So that's a second bullet point, right? This parking lot. Then, if you just write it down there, we can address it at the end. Your voices have been heard, and I'm not shutting you down. The other piece is to read the room. And this is not easy. Being a facilitator is someone who's not necessarily the loudest person in the room, but still somehow has to make everything work. And that is finding a way that if things are not going well, to do it without shutting everyone down. So here's an example, right? Suppose we have someone who loves to talk. Usually it's the product owner, always the product owner, right? So they're the ones who are like, no, let's not talk about this, let's talk about this. Oh, no, that's not a concern, we already figured that out, right? They're really trying to push on being productive because they have the answers already, but the rest of us don't, right? And so when you have someone commanding the room, it makes it feel like nothing is getting done in those meetings and you're not being heard. You're gonna have some people who start to disengage, and you're gonna have some people who start playing Pokemon. Like, clearly Pokemon Go is a very big theme in my talk. I've been catching a lot of Pokemon. Okay, so what are you gonna do about it, right? There's some activities up here. So there's breakouts and joining back together, and there's the concept of writing on sticky notes and sharing them. So these two activities are things that you can do to be able to level the playing field, right? If you break out people into groups of 2 and then they share their findings, you're starting to make it so that that one person who commands the conversation is commanding a conversation of 2, not a conversation of 8 or 16. And the sticky notes one is where like everyone kind of has an equal say, right? We always do this with our risks and mitigations in our Inception. So everyone writes them down individually, you put them up, you start to group them together, you figure out your themes. And when you write something down on a sticky note, they're both the same sizes, right? So all of a sudden, someone's input is no larger than someone else's input, at least in writing, unless someone writes in like very big bold, in like very black marker, but that's as good as it gets. So these are some of the techniques that I really liked. The checkpoints piece and the summarizing piece is the way to facilitate transitioning onto someone else. If you don't feel like you have closure, it's going to be very hard to move on to the next piece. So this is something that I'm about to do right now. So here's a summary of the project level tools that I've just talked about, right? That set the tone for this collaboration and this productivity. So it's potentially working on the SWOT analysis, and you can even do this with your team to figure out what your team's combined profile is, and also understanding personal goals and understanding what everyone wants out of the project, and then having the inception if you want to. So that was the project level. Let's narrow the scope down a little bit more to the weekly level. So I'm going to use a quote from Rob Mee. Rob Mee says that people are happiest when they are being productive. And I completely relate to this, because if I'm spending all my time in meetings, I am a miserable person to work with, and I think everyone else is somehow very miserable too, to work with. And when I am being productive and I'm shipping code, I'm very happy. And so what can we do about this, and how can we still have this entire feedback loop and this alignment and this planning when all you want to do is execute, right? So that's like the goal. And what we do at Labs is we try to gear our meetings around these four pieces and still make it so that the majority of the time is spent in execution. So what we do is we have stand-ups. And stand-ups are this alignment piece, right? We have them every day. They're 5 to 10 minutes. They happen right after our company stand-up. And so that's like on our calendar at 9:10 every day. We have a stand-up. Everyone shows up, talks about what they did, potentially what they're doing for the day, and any blockers that they have. Meeting happens to be, like, we force people to stand up, first of all. Happens to be around like 5 minutes, and if it's any longer, people start to complain. They're like, my knees hurt, which is, this meeting has been going too long, right? So that's the alignment piece. And then the next piece is planning, right? So we have IPMs. IPMs are iteration planning meetings. And that is where, for the week, like usually on a Monday, you're planning out what are our stories, we point them, so we figure out the level of complexity, the amount of work, and the amount of uncertainty that's built into each one. And in order to have and we try to make this just 1 hour. No, by we try to, it's only scheduled for an hour, so it's gonna be an hour or less, and we're just gonna cut it off at that point. So in order to make those meetings go well, we have pre-IPMs. IPMs have everyone in the room. Pre-IPMs will usually have only one engineer in the room who's able to work through those stories and make sure that there's a minimal amount of confusion so that when we have everyone's time, it's like very efficient and we're not spending 2 hours arguing on the semantics of a story, which happens all the time. And then work, I feel like we all know what that means, right? Yeah, it's my favorite part. We try to make it such that we're only spending 2 hours-ish a week in meetings for engineers and a little bit more. Like, as a PM, you're spending a lot more time in meetings, but they're usually with stakeholders. It's a lot more productive work than just arguing about what we're doing all the time. And the last piece is this feedback. So CL stands for client liaison. So we will have, you need to have meetings with your product owner, right? You want to update them on what's going on, otherwise they're going to freak out and check in with you 4 times a day. And so we have these meetings where our client liaison, which is like usually the associate director, the person that's working with us on the project, is meeting with the product owner. And so they are talking about, on a very broad level, how the project is going. And that is sometimes where like us engineers will join the meeting, sometimes not. It's really up to them. And we try to only have like 1 representative, so we're not wasting everyone's time and everyone can spend time in the execution phase. So in order to have a successful CL, right, there's a parallel. So just like an IPM needs a pre-IPM, we have a CL meeting that has a pre-CL component, and that is where we meet with our associate director or whoever it is and give them an update on how the project's going so that they know exactly what they want to talk about during the CL meeting, and we're not like bringing up things out of nowhere. Sometimes this is a good opportunity for mentorship as well. So you're dealing with these issues, it doesn't need to be in front of the client. The last piece is my favorite. It's retros. So a retrospective is talking about how the week went. What went well, what didn't go well, and what went meh, or like, I'm kind of confused about this. And what comes out of those are action items. So this is the cycle, and in reality, we only spend 1 hour in a retro and 1 hour in an IPM. So we try to spend 38 hours in that execution phase and just have a representative to go to the other meetings, except for the stand-up. It's like 5 minutes, though. I'm not going to count it. So the schedule helps set the tone to assure people that their concerns will be voiced, that there's a planning piece, and that we can be productive. So I really like this Dilbert cartoon to kind of talk about why we need this schedule. So it's like when someone comes to your cell or to your desk and is trying to change the scope on you all of a sudden. And so like the easiest way to avoid this is to not be present. But you can't always do that. So it's nice to have a schedule to predictably align and plan work so that the majority of the time is doing it and you don't have to worry about the PM changing scope. Like if something new is going to pop up in the backlog, they're going to have a conversation with you and it won't be unexpected. So I just talked about retros. We literally write down in our retros on a whiteboard a happy smile, a meh smile, and a sad smile, sad face, not a smile. And action items that what we want to come out of it so that we can eliminate our experiments and our mistakes to 1 week, right? Well, if it's not going well, we're going to talk about it. And we try to make that a safe space so we can do that. Action items also prevent needless whining. So when someone is really upset about something, they can talk about it, but our first question is going to be, all right, are there any action items that are coming out of this? And you learn really quickly that engineers are very efficient about this. So what they'll do is they'll voice less concerns. But often if they have an idea in mind, this is a way where they can voice it. And what's very important is when you have an action item to have one person who owns that action item. So literally put in parentheses who's going to own that. And then at our next retro, we usually go through the weekly action items from the past week, and we try to see if those are being addressed with a nice big check mark. So there is accountability with that too. Sometimes, especially with engineers, it's really weird to capitalize the entire discussion on something that was difficult technically or confusing technically, or that there's a growing concern because we have some tech debt that we're accruing. So sometimes we'll have tech retros. And another thing that I like is that I've been on teams where we are like 10 people working simultaneously on the same code base, like on the same application, and moving really, really, really fast, right? So things will come up and there'll be architecture changes or naming changes or new tools and helpers that we want to use. So we'll put that into a parking lot and we'll go through that after stand-up every single day. So that's something just for engineers. I think that's really helpful. All right, so that's it for weekly level, right? Weekly level tools give people a forum and a place to be heard. And so the tools we talked about, right, are setting a schedule and cadence, providing feedback opportunities at multiple levels, right, that CL meeting and that retro, providing a safe haven to get work done free from scope changes, which means put your scope stuff in the IPM, and to have a way to collect feedback and that stuff, right? So the last piece is the daily level. How are we doing on time? Oh, we're pretty good. All right. So the last piece is the daily level. And on the daily level, what are you going to do to mitigate those issues? So one of the things that I found really helpful is to talk in person and to record in writing. And I say this because when you're having this long-term conversation, if you can, and I know that a lot of you guys have remote team members or are like not necessarily co-located at the same time, but if possible, find a way to talk more in person than over email. And so we often try to have everyone at the same room or in the same desk area, so you can just walk over to the PM or pair with your designer to get something done. And there are also obviously some backup ideas, right? So you can schedule a check-in, because PMs are very busy, they're often in meetings, and it's very hard to get a hold of them. So one of the techniques we did most recently was to have an AM check-in and a PM check-in. And we almost never use it, but since it's on their schedule, other people can't schedule meetings in that time. So if it's gonna happen, it can happen during that time. And another one was we actually literally had something and we labeled it Bat Phone. So it was like anyone could call in and talk to us, and we could talk to anyone else through that phone. So it's kind of nice to have that one dedicated line. Also, record in writing, right? So once we've had this discussion, if you are in that meeting, it's really helpful to make sure that this is being written and like literally word for word suggest, hey, do you mind recording what we just said in the story or in our Google Doc or in our Epic? So an Epic is like this overarching piece of information that has a lot of business context, recording all of that information in there, not only just because it's good to have it written down, but because it's going to come back later, and you want to know who said what, and you want to know what the rules are. And we as pivots, we actually change pairs every single day, so there's constant changing like buckets of information, and sometimes someone will only stay on the same feature or story for 2 days. So we need to have a way to write that information down, and this seems to work pretty well. All right, so the last piece I wanted to talk about is like this concept of how when coders are working together, sometimes they build up some frustration towards each other. Maybe they're reviewing each other's pull requests, or maybe they are feeling as though the other person is wrong, right? And so then they start going at each other's throats. And like before you know it, everyone's throwing around computers everywhere and everyone's really frustrated. So we want people to work together, but how are we going to be able to align what we're going to do and be on the same page? So for us, we're a little crazy, so we do TDD and we do pairing. This is what I feel is crucial to us avoiding fights. And the way that it works, so this is, the caveat is, I know that not everyone wants to do TDD and pairing, or some people aspire to do it but see that it's a little hard to get their team to do it. So I'm going to break this down into the feedback loop in 1 second. But it's a lot easier to agree on a test than it is to agree on what to do about it, right? So you got to start with the easiest thing. We agree on what to do. We know what the inputs and outputs are. Then let's just go with the simplest implementation and get it done. And we do something called red-green refactor. So you write a test, you make sure it fails, there's no false positives, no false negatives. You make sure it's green afterwards, and then you refactor. And so this refactor piece, right, that's already like the little feedback circle going all over again. We try to build that into everything that we do. And since it's such a hardcore rule, you can kind of lean into that when people push back. And then you don't have any pull requests anymore because you're pairing. And I used to call pull request judgment day because it's like when a bolt of lightning strikes down your code and then you just basically got to start all over again. So how does that map to this feedback loop? This agreeing on a test is kind of the alignment and planning piece. And going with the simplest implementation and the red-green refactor is the execution and feedback piece. So I really like TDD and pairing. I've paired before without doing test-driven development, and let me tell you about that. So we both agreed that we wanted to build the next piece out, and we knew that all we had to do was pair together and agree on what to do. But literally, it took us a half hour, because one person got on the keyboard and they're like, wait, what are you doing? I thought we were gonna do this. I thought we were gonna do this. And then the other person's like, well, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why would we go and do a map? What is our output even? And like, it's so much confusion. And we realized for the first time ever that we were like free floating into this world without at least agreeing on what we're doing. And that's what tests kind of drive out, is agreeing on what you're doing first. So the last tool that I wanted to give you guys is daily retros. So daily retros circulate feedback a lot faster. And I don't do this all the time. I do this when it's like brand new with a new team. So if I'm working with someone else, and I had this one example, right, where I felt like I was being left behind. I just joined the team. This person had been on the team for 4 or 5 months already. And so when I got on, I was literally grabbing onto the roller coaster, and I was being taken for a ride. But we often switch pairs, and we have people who keep context. So I didn't feel comfortable that I could. So what I did was I forced the daily retro conversation. So I said, and it's like, it sounds very mechanical, but it's not that bad, right? I just asked them how they thought the day went. They're like, oh, it was great. Like, you were totally keeping up and like catching along, and like, we wrote so much code. And so I was like, I was not keeping up. And I was not really understanding what was going on. Did you feel like there were times where I was confused? And they're like, huh, yeah, now that you mention it, there was. And so we go straight into what can we do tomorrow. So my suggestion was you have to sit on your hands for 30 minutes. And it worked pretty well. So it started to get to the point where we were transferring that context. And vice versa, I've done the same thing too, where if I'm familiar with something, I'm going to go very fast, and I'm not going to know. If we're pairing, we're looking at each other, like at our own respective screens. So it's very hard to read it unless you're doing explicit check-ins to see how they're doing. So at the end of the day, I can say like, hey, was that too fast? How do you feel like it went? And I can get that feedback. Sometimes I'm going too slow for them, and I can speed up afterwards, and sometimes I'm going too fast. So I'm limiting, instead of like finding out on a weekly basis, I can limit it to a daily basis. So those were the tools that we talked about on the daily basis, right? Talk in person, write down what you want to do, find a way to align first, whether it's TDD and pairing or some sort of other way, discussing on a high level, and then doing daily retros. All right, so here's the bonus piece. Let me see how we're doing on time. All right, so what to do when things get tense. I like to borrow this from the office. And so like, you can have your cake and eat it too. You can burn down your bridges, but why would you build your bridges if you're gonna burn them down, right? You're just not gonna have your cake anymore. So it's very important to approach a tense conversation with the mindset of understanding how it's going to go for them. So I'll tell you a little story. We had a time during an Inception where we were going into the risks and mitigation piece, and 2 people had worked together before. It was the product owner and an engineer on our side. So during the risks and mitigation piece, this person brought up that one of the product owner's personality traits is a risk. And so not only did they do it very directly, Yeah, I feel like only one person in the room is going, oh my God. But like, this is like really intense, right? So they're like, you do this, and this is a risk for a project because you did this on the last time. So bringing up baggage, talking to them directly, and embarrassing them in front of the entire team, right? Not so good. See this animal right here? It's a hydra. When you cut down one head, you're gonna get like 5 million heads that grow back. And so what happened in this situation, this person had to apologize in person, apologize in front of the entire team, apologize in person again, and then work really hard to earn their trust back. So you might want to snap and address the problem that way and cut off one head, but it's really important to know if it solves anything. And in general, if you are attacking a person of power, it's not good to address it directly in front of other people. Don't embarrass them. So it's not always the case, right? But you want to think about the way to attack the problem. What are the ramifications? And is it better to do it one-on-one or in a team? So is it something very sensitive, or is it something where you want alignment for the whole team? My other story is that so my name is Neha, and I had a client PM who really enjoyed mispronouncing my name because he thought it was really funny, and I didn't think it was very funny, and it kind of sucked. And so I tried addressing them one-on-one, and I said, hey, like, why don't you just not do that because no one else is laughing? So like, I know you're trying to be funny, but it's not even working, so maybe we should just not do that. And they kind of shrugged it off. So the next place that I went to is I elevated it on a team level. So while we were at a meeting together, I said like, hey, I would really appreciate it if you wouldn't call me that and just use my name, which is what everyone else refers to me as. And so I did elevate it to this next level. And I did it because I needed this alignment and I needed the backing of the entire group. Sometimes I will go, if I'm having a crucial conversation, and tell 1 or 2 people to make sure that I have that backup in the room too. So kind of influencing the group that way. The final piece, I promise, and this is it, is addressing the issue head on. So I'm actually in the middle of this book. It's Crucial Conversations, and it is a methodology, and it's a book about how to influence these conversations that are very particularly hard to handle. And so these are some of the notes that I've taken on so far, and it is knowing what you want out of the conversation, establishing these shared goals and shared interests. So what's our common ground, right? It goes back to this piece about we're on the same team and we have these same values, and giving people the benefit of the doubt. I feel as though for me, something when I'm in an altercation that makes me the most upset is when someone doesn't give me the benefit of the doubt. Because maybe what I said was mistranslated, and for other people, maybe I've interpreted something very differently because of the way that I've grown up or the way that I'm used to, right? I'm like a very theoretical person, and so if you don't hit me on the theory side, I'm just not gonna understand it. And then finally, sharing your side objectively, right? Sounds a lot easier, but this is a really great way. This is out of the book, word for word, of a way to be objective. So you share your facts, you tell your story, you ask for others' paths, and you talk tentatively, and you encourage testing. So it's kind of like, this is how I feel, this is how it's been going, getting a good understanding of how they feel and how it's been going, and encouraging action items out of it and testing it later. So I had a situation pretty recently, actually, where one of our teammates was not engaged, and the client noticed and literally said to me word for word, you need to handle this because we're going very fast, there's a lot at stake, and I need you to get them on board. So I was put in this wonderful situation where now I had to have this conversation with one of my teammates that I've just built so much trust between to say, like, get your shit together and start doing work, right? But I'm not gonna do it like that. So I approached the conversation a lot better. And what I said was, hey, it's come up to me that, like, you've been a little disengaged recently, and this is not something that I've necessarily been observing or voicing, but it's been coming from the client. So do you feel the same way? And they said, yeah, that's totally true. And I said, okay, I'm not trying to say that anyone is perfect, but what is going on? And like, is there a way for us to be able to start talking about that? And so they said, A, the language was completely new to them, and they felt like they were very behind, and they didn't feel like there was a path for them to start understanding what was going on. And B, this was an interesting case where they weren't supposed to be on the project in the first place. Now all of a sudden they're being put on the project. So we're like, okay, what are the alternative options? One of the alternatives is for them not to be on the project anymore. But we talked about the other projects, and it seemed like while this project was suboptimal, it was the best one for them. So I was like, all right, this is the best project for you. We have to find a way to get value out of it. What makes you excited? And this person really likes technical thinking, very highly mathematical work. So from then on, I was like, all right, I can put you on this task, I can put you on this task, and let's find a rule. So let's make it so that you can't pull your phone out for a full hour, and just start with that. And I'll do the same thing. So we put our phones one stack on top of the other. First person to get their phone loses, right? Some people do this at dinner, where like everyone puts their phone into a pile, and first person to reach their phone has to pay the bill. So we started with that, and lo and behold, I told our clients the minute they addressed this with me, I was like, give me 2 days, right? Timeout. Yeah, okay. Give me 2 days, and let's talk about it in 2 days. So before we blow up, before this becomes blown out of proportions, let's test this, and let's collect the data over 2 days. So after 2 days, everything was fine. They found a way to be engaged, and it was because I didn't antagonize them in a conversation, and I didn't embarrass them publicly, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I wanted to listen to them. So that went really well, and I'm pretty surprised that it went so well, actually. So that's pretty much it. My goal was to give you a tool set of techniques to enable all personalities of your team, clients, and customers to prevent and mitigate issues as they come up with a facilitator's mindset, right? And so here it is. Here's the tool chest. So we talked about all of these individually, and this is pretty much the pinnacle of my talk. So you can take this photo if you want to. And that's it. So congratulations, you have a tool chest. We have 8 minutes for questions and answers. Wow, okay. We have one.
Friendly engineering manager. So, as we look at transformation into our development areas, I have concerns of certain personalities just being able to cut it through. And so can you talk a little bit about just the evaluation of your existing talent pool? And, have you been involved in an exercise like that where you had to have some tough conversations to say you either cut it or you don't?
Yeah, so I think if I can summarize your question, if you are trying to do a transformation activity, potentially getting people to do pair programming, and you identify that maybe some personalities might not be a good fit for it, what are the techniques to be able to maybe get them a little bit more on board, and how can you evaluate whether someone is a good fit and not? Yep. Okay, so I have a story for you. So we very recently had a client engineer come over, and he flew in with us to have architectural conversations. And so as you can see based on our schedule, right, we spend all our time in execution. We don't really have meetings on the architecture. And so it's kind of like funny, because anytime I said this to a fellow pivot, they just started laughing and being like, what architectural conversations? So they were flying in to do this, and literally the product owner was like, they don't know their pair programming. So they came in, we sprung the trap on them, and we're like, you're pair programming with us. And so that could have been a really disastrous thing, because they were very passionate. They were very upset about the stack that we chose and why we didn't choose the stack that they're using right now. And they wanted to be part of it, and there was a big power play that was going on too. So the first thing was for us is we already have this existing knowledge of how pairing works. So kind of modifying our techniques a little bit. So I took them through the entire code base. I explained our schedule, and I was pretty explicit about the task that we were going to do. So I was like, all right, I'm going to work on this test and then I'm going to hand this over to you. So it's like being very explicit about it and acknowledging that this is new for them and giving them an open space to voice that. So this is going to work for some people. Some people really just want to operate with their headphones on. For these people, it's a little bit harder, but I try to do the same thing as like kind of we started off with. So I'm like, this is an experiment. So let's try this out for 1 week. And let's talk about it at the end of each day so I can figure out what's working and what's not working. And just try it for 1 week. I had this because I tried this. Since we're pair programming together, we work from 9 to 6, pretty hard, like hardcore 9 to 6, and then not other times. You have to be present at the same time in order to pair with each other. And this person just did not want to show up at 9 a.m., right? Because it's early and that person works out from 9 to 10. So it's very frustrating for them because then their entire schedule's upset. So the way we started was, let's start and let's just try for this 1 week. If you can start at 9 and you can end at 6. And if we can't, that's totally fair. And we can talk about it at the end of the week during the retro. So it's like giving them a way to voice their concerns and giving them that timeline. In general, people who are very empathetic and who are interested in the long-term productivity of the team and like literally long-term goal, right? You're trying to share your context and you're trying to grow in your career, which means you can't be held down by all of the knowledge that you know and you have to pass it on to someone else. Those are the people who are going to be great candidates for it, and there's some people who just aren't on board and don't want to. But if you can get the allies, like the people who everyone else looks to for trends and changes, and you can get them on board, then eventually the last person who doesn't want to do it is going to be left out. And so they'll eventually come around.
I get very concerned about the elders as well. And I like your tip about, okay, you just sit on your hands for a half hour while I
Yes, yeah. There's definitely a lot of tension for people who are so what you just said, I have to repeat it for the video and stuff, is that we were talking about the technique of having someone sit on their hands. So this is especially helpful when you have someone who has a lot of knowledge, who's pairing with someone who has very little knowledge. And that's very frustrating for some engineers because they just want to get it done. And so part of that is because they probably think their ass is on the line if they don't get it done. And the other part of it is that some people learn differently. And so I think whenever I get frustrated, because I do too sometimes, right? And I do also feel like I'm under the same clock and we have to be productive for our clients. It's knowing that if I can teach them now, then I don't have to teach them later. And like they can start to work on that code base and they can take on that story and I can move on to something more interesting. So it's like really just thinking about that long-term piece and having this. And we do something also called ping pong pairing, which is one person writes a test, one person makes that test pass, they write the test, the next person makes the test pass. So you can't be coding forever unless you're very slow at coding. You just write the test, someone else fixes it, someone else goes down. It kind of ping pongs back and forth. And so I like that. And the last one that I do sometimes is a timer. So we'll do this sometimes when we're mobbing, multiple people pairing at the same time. So like 3 people in a room, we'll set a timer and only one person can be in front of the computer for like 10 minutes at a time. And so when that timer is up, we use, I forgot what the tool is, but it's the one that like forces you to take a break. Timeout. Thank you. Pomodoro is also helpful, right, with the little timer. But timeout like kind of shuts down your computer, and so we'll have it shut down and shut on, and that'll be the transition time. So that's helpful too. Yeah.
I have a logistical question about pair programming. I haven't done it, but read about it. It's interesting. Some skips, some of it's scary, whatever.
Yeah.
Some of it sounds like this would be great. So, but I noticed you had said there were, if I heard you right, 2 monitors, and when maybe I just misread things, but I always thought there was 1 monitor, 1 keyboard, or
Yeah, so the question's around like what is the technical setup for pair programming, and the initial idea was that it was in front of 1 monitor, but as I mentioned, it's in front of 2 monitors. So the way we do it is 2 monitors, 2 keyboards, 2 mice connected to the same computer. So the reason I've literally tried this where I've tried to sit with someone and we've tried to pair together, and I've never been more frustrated in my life because it's usually like one person just going at it and coding and the other person checking their phone behind it. So when I'm coding, if they're checking their phone, it's frustrating, and if I'm in the passenger seat, it's also frustrating, and I feel like I'm very disengaged. Having 2 separate monitors connected to the same computer means we have this autonomy where we can both operate the mouse, we can both operate the computer, and I don't have to be turning the whole time and watching them. I can actually watch the code in front of my computer without feeling like we're sharing the same screen space.
What about the, I mean, you're both operating the same mouse.
Yeah,
Is
so.
there an issue with that, or?
Yeah, it's awkward sometimes, but you kind of just get used to it. So it's like sometimes it just means you have to talk about it. So it's like, what? Oh, do you want to type, or do you want me to type? And so it's just like letting the awkwardness be what it is and getting used to it. Screen Hero for remote pairing allows you to have 2 separate mice that operate independently with your name tag with it. So you can have that option, but otherwise.
Google Docs,
Pardon?
the way Google Docs works?
Yeah, Google Docs like allows you kind of to operate independently on the same document. So it's kind of like that. Screen Hero does that too.
So is the screen duplicated or extended?
So the question is the screen duplicated or extended? And yeah, it's mirrored. Yeah. So you see the exact same thing. Some people have the instinct, like the want to extend it, and I think the only time that works is if you're trying to do some research on a topic, and so you want to kind of have independent reading so you can come back together. That's the only time I've seen that extending the screen really helps. Yeah. And hold on one second. Okay, I don't know if I'm going to get kicked out, but I'll do one more question, and then you guys can come. Actually, I'm going to conclude now just because it's 3:12, but I will be outside, and you guys can talk to me. Thank you so much.